Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Chris Nebbins, and I am the Vice President of the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. I'm going to tell you a couple of things about the foundation. We're going to thank some very important people, and then I'll get out of the way for Kelly and our authors to come up, and you can see the main event. The Des Moines Public Library Foundation is a 501c3 charity organization whose sole purpose is to support this library, the Des Moines Public Library. We do that through advocating, through things like standing up for things like censorship that we're trying to avoid in this library. We do it by raising funds, especially. For those of you who know the Orphan X novels, not everybody's got a bank account like Orphan X, like Evan Smoak does. But there are some really generous people who give money to the library as if they did, and I'm going to name them in a moment. But most of our donations are coming from just sort of normal folks walking in and out of the library. And so from that perspective, it would mean a lot to us if outside of money, you would fill out these cards that are on your chairs that say, we'd love to hear from you. Not while the program's going on, but afterward, or mail it back, that's fine. And if you're feeling so moved and you've got a couple of bucks in your pocket, there's some envelopes outside that you can fill up. We'd be happy to collect them and make sure that that money goes back into the programs that we offer for free to adults in the community who want to hear from great authors, to children, how important literacy is to every community, but we make sure to make it a priority here. There's summer reading programs and then programs all school year long. Making sure the library is funded with some of the things that just they need to keep doing business that may or may not be sort of in the city's budget, right? And so we try to add where we can. And so thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for turning in those forms if you'll do it. And thank you for any donations that you might be able to make, especially the donors who give directly to the AViD program. I want to thank Prairie Meadows, the Nationwide Foundation, Brad and Kelly Edmister, Karen Schaff and Steve Jane, Pamela Bass Bookie and Harry Bookie, Humanities Iowa, a state-based affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Mary Kay and Daniel M. Kelly Family Foundation, Cultivating Compassion, the Dr. Richard Deming Foundation, Shelley and Martin Brody, Deborah and Douglas West, Dory Briles, Judy Blank, Jan Fried and John Fisher, almost done, Rachel Stauffer and Jim Lawson, and Dawn Taylor. If we could give them a round of applause. So it's now my pleasure to introduce two of our most popular action writer thrillers, Gregg Hurwitz and Nick Petrie, who are also friends. They're joining us to talk about their books, their writing careers, and more. Gregg Hurwitz is the best-selling author of 24 thrillers, including the popular Orphan X series. Gregg currently serves as co-president of International Thriller Writers. Additionally, he's written screenplays and television scripts for many of the major studios and networks, comics for AWA, including the critically acclaimed anthology New Think, DC and Marvel, poetry, political and culture pieces for the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, The Bulwark, and others, and he helped write the opening ceremony of the 2022 World Cup. Hurwitz's Orphan X series features Evan Smoak, who was trained as a child to be an off-the-books government assassin. Crime fiction newsletter First Clue has called the series a blend of Batman, The Equalizer, and Vince Flynn's Mitch Rapp. His most recent Orphan X book, Lone Wolf, was released earlier this year. Nick Petrie is the best-selling author of the Peter Ash books, a series of action-packed thrillers that follow a war veteran with PTSD as he solves a variety of dangerous mysteries. His first novel, The Drifter, won the ITW Thriller and Barry Awards and was nominated for Edgar, Anthony, and Hammett Awards. He won the 2016 Literary Award from the Wisconsin Library Association and was named one of Apple's 10 writers to read in 2017. A husband and father, he has worked as a carpenter, remodeling contractor, and building inspector. His most recent Peter Ash book, The Price You Pay, was released earlier this year. They will be joined on stage by Kelly Marble, who's a library marketing team member, and I will welcome them up now. Thank you.
we live? This is like sitting in a potato chip. Are you on?
I'm on.
All right.
Okay.
It was in my contract that my microphone be on and yours be off, Nick.
Wasn't it also to have mine shut off periodically throughout the, yeah.
So welcome to Des Moines. Is this your guys' first time in the city, or?
It is my first time in Des Moines. I love this city.
Nice.
So far, I've had good meals, good hotel, good library. Everything's going according to plan for me.
You do have a beautiful library.
So I know some of people in the audience will be familiar with maybe one of your series or both of your series. So to kind of get started, how about you both give us kind of your elevator pitch so that everyone kind of knows what each of your series is about.
So I write a book about a Marine Corps veteran with post-traumatic stress named Peter Ash. And at the beginning of the series, Peter has fairly crippled by post-traumatic stress in the form of claustrophobia. He can't be inside for really more than 20 minutes before he has a panic attack and kind of freaks out. And the series is it sort of tracks the course of Peter's recovery from, as much as one can recover from post-traumatic stress. And sort of he falls in love, he finds a life, and in the newest book, Peter is actually this is a sidekick book, as writers say sometimes, where Peter's best friend Lewis, who is a career criminal, who sort of shows up to be the helper character. It's Lewis's turn to be the client. His past comes back to haunt him, and Peter gets to come to Lewis's aid. So it's a lot of fun to develop that sidekick character in a new way with this new book.
Are you gonna do mine too, or?
I could.
All right, so I write a series called Orphan X, and Orphan X, my main character's name is Evan Smoak, and he was a kid in a foster home in East Baltimore, and he's taken out of this foster home at the age of 12, and he's trained off the books to be a government assassin, starting at the age of 12, to go places the US government cannot go legally, and to kill people in violation of international law. And part of the reason why they take kids out of foster homes is they want kids who nobody will miss. He could get caught or tortured to pieces, and there's no one to go after him. He has a very unofficial footprint. His other nickname is the Nowhere Man. And so the thing is when he reaches the place where his training begins, his handler is something like a father figure to him. And he tells him early on, he says, the hard part won't be making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And so he kept this little pilot light awake inside of him all this time. Would have been a lot easier if he was just a true believer, because as we know, black and white thinking is a great short to middle term strategy. But it wasn't. And at a certain point, some of the executions that he was committing came removed from his own moral compass, and he fled the program. They're pursuing him because he doesn't just know where the bodies are buried, he buried them. And he goes off the radar, and he helps people who are in terrible need, who have nowhere else to turn now. He's got an encrypted phone number, 1-855-2-NOWHERE. You can call that number, and he will answer. And people call him when they have nowhere else to turn, and he answers the phone when they are being terrorized by people or a group of people, and he will come and do anything that he needs to do in order to help them. One of the things for me that's really been fun in the series is it's writing, as much as I'm writing and there's action and there's suspense elements to it, it's so much about character. At the end of the day, we care about character more than anything. If I ask you what your favorite James Bond scene is, you'll hesitate for a moment, but we all know how he takes his martini, right? We know who we want to spend time with as a character. And for him, the series is really about the process of him learning to speak. I say he would never learn how to speak the strange language of intimacy. And every case is something that helps him claim another little mosaic piece of his heart and bring him back, his soul, and bring him back in and closer to humanity. And I move a lot between the sort of heightened archetypal world of thrillers, but then he lives hiding among ordinary people in a penthouse in the Wilshire Corridor in Beverly Hills, among all these ordinary people. And the one thing we never get to see in movies or books is Jason Bourne go home, right? Or Jack Reacher have an awkward encounter with the single mother who he might have chemistry with in the elevator. And so Evan's constantly seesawing between this heightened world and then the world where you and I live. And he'll get yanked, you know, as he's bleeding with a knife wound that he's trying to cover up, he'll get yanked into like an annoying HOA meeting, and they're debating whether or not there should be kombucha in the lobby as he's trying to stench his bleeding. And so that's the background of the character.
That's awesome. And so you both, Nick, you live in Milwaukee. Greg, you live in Los Angeles. Feels like the community of thriller writers is really supportive of each other. I know you two have been friends for years. Could you tell us a little bit about how you met, what the community's like, how you all support each other?
Apparently romance writers are really mean to each other. But when crime writers, we get to kill people on the page. So, you know, in general, we're getting out those negative emotions. I just have found, I mean, Greg's been doing this a lot longer than I have. I just have found this to be a really welcoming community. And did we meet at my first Thriller Fest?
I can't remember where we met. I still remember there's a very famous mystery bookstore in Scottsdale called the Poison Pen. And I went to look at y'all. You guys are pros. And when I went there, Barbara Peters, who is the kind of wondrous owner, said, you have to read. It was the second one. I'd read The Drifter. Did I blurb The Drifter? I can't remember.
I think your blurb got lost in the mail, actually.
Is that right? I'm terribly sorry. I'll have to talk to my ghostwriter about that. But the second book, Burning Bright, she said, you have to read this. This guy's fantastic. And I had read The Drifter, whether I blurbed it or not. And then I read Burning Bright, and she just insisted on it. So I'd read you before I met you because of Barbara's insistence. It shows you how important word of mouth is, right? You can't fake enthusiasm. There's thousands of books out there. And so then at some point, we met somewhere that I can't quite remember. And then I came out, I did an event in Milwaukee. And then
this is my secret trick for meeting other writers, is that I invite them to Milwaukee to my local bookstore and I interview them. And I've gotten to, this is how we got to know each other much better. And it's a great, I mean, you do this all the time, especially with sort of up and coming authors.
Yeah, that's right. And then we had a good martini and steak dinner with Robert Crace in LA.
Except for poor Robert was not eating steak at that point.
Oh yeah. It was a big loss. Are you guys Robert Crace fans? He's wonderful. Yeah. And so look, you're asking about how it works. Part of this is, I think so much of it is, as with anything, there's a culture to any community. And the culture, the template of the crime writing community is pretty spectacular. I had a lot of help when I started really young. I started my first book, I was an undergrad, and I had some luck early. But I got blurbs and support from Lee Child and Michael Conley and Robert Crace and Sue Grafton. I was at a dinner with Sue Grafton. Oh, I had such a crush on her. She was so cool. Yeah. And she said, I remember when I first asked her to blurb my book, she said, you can mail me that book. And, if I do not like it, you will not hear from me. If I don't read it, you will not hear from me. But if I read it and I like it, I will give you a blurb. I was like, okay, Sue, anything you say. And so it sort of just set the template. We have a lot of people who are really secure. I think crime writers know also that a rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, so many people who read me, read Nick, read Greenie, read Baldacci, read, Kathy Reichs. It's readers read, and the more readers that read, the better. And so there is something, I think, to the fact that we exorcise our shadows on the page, right? If you're spending all day dreaming of mayhem and murder, it's just too exhausting to get like bitchy at someone at a cocktail party, and then also, that's the template. I mean, that's really the standard that this community has set, is that like you help people and you blurb people and you encourage people. And
yeah, and it's also a really small community. So like there are a couple of people who are not so nice, and kind of everybody knows who they are, and everybody just sort of, well, I wouldn't have brought this up. So it is the two best parts of my life as a writer are getting to do this and getting to talk to readers, and you know, getting on the phone with another writer who, you know, we share the same disease, right? Somebody who understands kind of the stories that rattle around in your head.
It is a compulsion. I don't know any writers who are successful who aren't compelled to write. It's a compulsion. It's weird. It is a lot like an illness. Moving on. So how does Milwaukee figure as a theme in your novels, Nick? Sorry, next question. I think we're just going to let that one lay there on the table.
So, moving into writing and those stories that rattle around in your head, when you're thinking about, when I think about some of the writing advice I've sometimes heard from people, it's like, write what you know. And both of you write characters and experiences that feel very real, but also are experiences that you don't necessarily have, like being a veteran with PTSD or being an ex-government spy. So how do you go about writing those kind of characters with experiences that you haven't had but that feel so real?
I think write what you know is terrible advice. I think it's terrible advice. I think you have to write, it's the same with anything. You pursue that which calls to you. You go after what fascinates you. And I've had all sorts of great experiences in the course of writing. I've done research. I've snuck onto demolition ranges with Navy SEALs to blow up cars. I've gone undercover into mind control cults. I've gone up into stunt airplanes. I mean, one of the benefits of being a professional dilettante, which in some ways is what you are as a writer, is any dark little corner of the culture that fascinates you, you get to wander over and just shine a light into it and explore it. And I think so much of, we undervalue where we put our attention and our focus. That's where we orient ourselves. That's what we move towards. And so I use the books. In some ways, my favorite thing is I got a blank page and my brain, such as it is, and I get to orient towards anything that's of maximum interest to me. And I get to dive into those worlds and meet people who are experts in it and tease it apart and, you know, get kind of snout deep in the muck of it and then try and write something that's thrilling and exciting.
And I agree. The emotional heart of these characters in these books, there is some of what I know, right? But the fun part is to basically put this, to take some piece of you and blow it up into larger than life, and to dive into something like there's always some piece of my life that I'm writing a book about, but I don't know it until the book is done. And I have to figure out how to talk about it to an audience. And suddenly it's, oh yeah, I was actually thinking a lot about my son with this book.
That's so weird. Okay. That used to happen to me I'd finish a book and then I'd look back on it. It would be like glaringly obvious what I was dealing with when I was writing it. Like, oh, this is about my terror over my newfound vulnerability about becoming a parent. What's weird, what's happening with Orphan X is I sort of know what I'm writing about as I'm writing it in real time now. Like I'm like working out the problem as I'm writing it almost. And so there's a weird thing of like catching up, but I know what you mean, that you look back sometimes and it's like clear as day, some major motif that you just didn't pay attention to.
Wrestling with, right? That suddenly it's, you put it on the page. But so for me, the other piece, so I write about veterans, and I'm not a combat vet or a vet of any sort, not even a veterinarian. But so for me, it was falling into that community. I had all of these, I used to be a freelance building inspector, and I had all these clients coming home after the surge, and I sort of, you know, I've always been somebody that people tell things to. In line at the grocery store not too long ago, I was chatting with somebody about the weather, and then she said, you know, I think I'm gonna get divorced. And so like people tell me stuff. I know secrets about Gregg that you would not believe. But
oh, wait, why did she just, were you like hitting on her?
No, we were having idle conversation, and it happens on the regular. In airports, and I'm a chatty guy. I'm interested in people, and I think that's part of it. Is I'm genuinely curious about other human beings. But so I would be in a basement with somebody who has, you know, been home from Iraq for 2 months, and mom and dad and the, you know, the spouse are measuring the curtains and where's the couch going to go in this house that they're just buying. And I see somebody with an army tattoo, and I say, so, were you over there? And I'm not connected to their family life. I'm not connected to their military life, right? So there's no, they're going to spend 3 or 4 hours with me and never see me again. And so the stories something would come out, right? I was a safe person to tell this to. So for me, that has been the great gift of diving into sort of what those experiences are like. And I get people email me and message me all the time. The one that I can't get out of my head is the guy who said, I thought I was going crazy and I was ready to kill myself until somebody gave me your book. And then I realized I had post-traumatic stress and I'm getting help. And thank you very much. And he sent me a picture of him and his 3 little kids and his wife. And like the fact that, like, I'm writing these to be entertaining, right? The goal is to have fun and to take you out of your life for a little while. And the fact that you can have an impact like that is kind of astonishing. So for me, that's like diving into that piece of it is one of the big rewards for me.
That's a really impactful story. I get to be up here asking both of these guys questions. If any of you have any questions, there are question cards on each of your seats that you can write any questions down on and hand them to Aaron or one of our volunteers. And if you don't have a pencil, they also have pencils they could give you to write down your question. Okay, so kind of moving back into your writing, your series. You both have long writing series, 8 books, but they're also accessible where people could really jump in at any book and still know what's going on. So how do you balance writing with enough context for people who are new to the series in a book, but also at the same time so the context doesn't feel repetitive to the people who are have been with you since book 1?
Well, it's a very delicate balance, but like you said, really the goal is to have people be able to pick these books up in whatever order they find them. There is a character arc that occurs, but you don't need to know everything that happens. And you really don't need much more than a paragraph to sort of say who the character is and what his experience has been. There are really only 3 continuing characters in my series. Each book takes place in a different place. So I have a lot of freedom, and there's not a lot of catching up to do necessarily. And that's by design because I'm terrified of getting bored, and I didn't want to get. I don't live in LA, which has a million different communities and opportunities to tell stories. Milwaukee has no organized crime. I was talking to a Milwaukee cop who said that Milwaukee only has disorganized crime. So it's not a super fertile place for these kinds of stories, which is part of why Peter is an itinerant soul.
Oh, well, I think part of it is, look, when we watch, do you remember the TV show ER? Like when you're watching ER, you don't know all the facts of what's happening. They don't slow down all the time and say, pass me the laryngoscope. But the laryngoscope is a L-shaped tool that's used to. So part of what you want to do is you want readers are reading for tone and engagement. And so a lot of times if there's something that's a recap, I'm trying to tell it in a new way. I'm trying to tell it as we're still moving forward and progressing with the plot and talking to the reader as if they're an insider who already knows what's happening. But yeah, you absolutely can jump into any of my books and I reset enough for new readers. And then there's a lot of Easter eggs for people who've read the whole series and who love series as they continue to progress. So, but anytime each book, and that's the aim. I get more readers with each book and then they go back to the beginning and start the series over.
There's a great Steven Spielberg line, tell a story on a moving sidewalk. And I think about that all the time because I want my books to have a certain velocity to them. I want you to keep turning the pages. And that's something I think that you do really well. Where you can do character, action, setting, kind of all in the same couple of sentences, right? And backstory is the same thing, right? You have to sort of fold it in so that it's as invisible as you possibly can make it. Again, Orphan X's world is not super complicated, right? You don't need to devote a whole chapter to who he is every time.
So when you're both thinking about your series, how far are you planning ahead? Do you have books ahead of you mapped out, or are you kind of more pantsers playing?
I'm pretty, I know the next two, I know the next three right now. I know out. And I have a notion of I have notions out of what's further than that. I remember when I first sold the series, I sold them on spec. On spec means that you write them without a deal. And before, I'd had a whole bunch of multi-book deals, but I wanted to make sure, I wound up with my same publisher. But when I wrote Orphan X, it was a departure, and I wanted to make sure that they really knew and got the series and wanted it, not just as book 2 of a 3-book deal. And so a big part of that was for me when I was writing it, I remember I pitched it and I said, look, like this phone will ring, it's this encrypted line, someone's on the other end who needs help, right? So that's one version of stories. Also, people can come after him from the program, so there's this sort of mythology aspect, like the mythological X-Files as opposed to the standalone X-Files. But I remember saying, like, one of these days, even though he's an orphan, he's a foster kid, he never knew his parents, that phone's gonna ring and he's gonna answer it and someone's gonna say, Evan, it's your mother. I still remember my agent was like, that's great, can you write that one next? And it was like, no, I can't write that one next.
The build up for that.
I know, because we need to wait, and that was the 6th book in the series. And so I have a lot of placeholders like that of notions of where to go that have to do with his increasing humanity. And as he changes and views himself as more human, what starts to happen is he views everybody around him as more human, including the people that he's gonna hurt or maim or kill. And then the very type of book starts to shift because it's got to have more depth. It's got to have more personality.
I'm super interested to read this next round of books that you're doing. I think it's I don't know, I've been a fan of you for a long time, but the evolution of Evan is a lot of fun to watch.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I don't know, if I'm lucky, I know what I'm doing 3 chapters ahead of where I'm working. So I am in a different category. I start with a situation, and I know who my series characters are, and hopefully the situation. I don't know what the big mystery is. I don't know what the thing is that they're going to try to prevent. So a thriller is a book where the heroes are trying to stop something from happening, as opposed to a mystery where they're trying to solve a murder typically.
It's already happened.
Right, that's already happened. And so what I write are thrillers with a mystery in the middle. And for me, it's much more interesting that way than to, then who the bad guy is, in chapter 4, and it's just a matter of sort of watching the puzzle pieces come together. But I don't know any of that stuff. I don't know. Often I don't actually know what the topic is. I'm just sort of, I found a good place to start. And
you have a character who I mean, Peter Ash, the thing that distinguishes these books is Peter Ash in a fight scene or in an action sequence feels different than Reacher or Bourne. I mean, so once you know a character and you've lived with a character, part of what happens is there's a uniqueness in the engagement with the story. And Peter Ash is so well evolved. And that's what people come, again, it's like the James Bond example that I gave. People come back for that character. And for you have enough of a hold on him now, and he's 3-dimensionalized enough that if you throw him into circumstances, he's going to say or do things that are different than what anyone else would say or do in those circumstances.
Well, yeah, and the characters start to live in your head in a way. And a long-running series, it really becomes. I remember Louise Penny, after she came back after a 3-year hiatus when her husband was ill. She basically cleared the field, won every award that year in Toronto, and she said, "It just felt so good to be back with my friends again." And that is honestly what it has become like to be sort of like, oh man, I wonder what he's going to do next. I don't know. I always think of you as sort of a very grown-up writer, right? You have all of these different things that you do, and I feel like I am just winging it every minute of every day, and they're, the characters often just sort of take over. Characters show up. And there's a character in this book named Teddy who got shot in the head. He's got a traumatic brain injury. He's a little nuts. He used to be a very dangerous guy, and now he's kind of a teddy bear. And he's a goofy character, and he just sort of showed up. And there's at least one character like that in every book where I'm just sitting in my office and well, what about this? And I just start to type, and I always feel like that's not how the grown-ups do it.
I have a secret for Nick that I'm going to tell you now at this point in our friendship. There are no grown-ups in writing.
Okay, this question is really interesting. So this person wants to know how you go about writing action scenes. Do you have to block things out before writing it, create a map or a diagram to keep track of where the characters are in space?
We actually fight each other, and that's how we do it.
No, I don't do that. I think in some ways that's approaching it from the opposite side of how I approach it. How I look at it is, it's exactly what we were just talking about, which is what distinguishes this with Evan, meaning that if it's a car chase that could be in a Greenie novel, it could be a Gray Man car chase, it could be a Bourne Identity car chase, then I haven't thought about it well enough. For me, even the action sequences are about the character. They're about the things that are distinctive to the character. And the other way that I think about it is that action sequence aren't just writing about a bunch of cool shit that happens in a certain order, right? It's not geometry. What it is much more is it's like its own, I think of them as their own little 3-act plays where they have a personality to them. Like I have one of them in The Nowhere Man, I want to say, where Evan's fighting this guy who's like way better than him at like grappling mixed martial arts. He's downstairs in this chateau and he's knocked away all the weapons. But there's this huge guy he's knocked into an indoor swimming pool that's in the same range, and that guy's shotgun is on the opposite side of the pool. And every time Evan fights this guy, he has to pick up the non-lethal round, which shoots beanbags, and that guy gets up out of the water, and Evan has to shoot him in the head to knock him down again, to then keep fighting this guy, and then the guy gets up and keeps moving towards the shotgun, and Evan has to free himself again and get back to the gun. And so there's two things that are happening at once as he's being sort of he can't quite match wits or match strength with this guy, but there's a whole other ticking clock that's occurring within both of them. And when you have a couple things that are happening like that, you can write a mini 3-act play that the action sequence has its own internal structure to it. And how he's content, then it also introduces humor, right? So you have another element aside from just, it's a left cross and then it's a right jab.
If it's humorless, it's something that you do that I really like. It's no fun. It's got to be fun.
What I do is no fun?
No, you don't want an action scene to be super grim unless it really is the point where the stakes are really, there and raised.
And they have to have themes, meaning, I think about them a lot visually. Like there's some of them where I wrote one, I'm going to forget which book now, in Dark Horse, that there's a raid, he's going to do a raid on a house, and it's a house where they're selling like a bad form of meth. It's called Contact is the drug, where people put it on like a contact lens, but a bad batch has been sold to them. And so he's going up and the house is like caught on fire and these guys are stumbling out and they're like melting from their faces and everyone's deranged. It's like this zombie apocalypse coming out of the house. And it's almost like that action sequence of him trying to get in to get to somebody feels like this descent through hell. And so that becomes the imagery of the house, and the house is on fire and he's fighting through fumes. And so if you can think about them as it's a fight scene, it's a car chase, it's a shootout in a warehouse, but you think about what they mean thematically in the story, this is sort of like this hero's descent to the underworld almost.
They have to do so much more work than you think. In order to be right and to feel right. The books that are just action sequences strung together, they're fun, but it's like eating popcorn, right? There's no satisfaction at the end of it.
They get boring. You get action fatigue, right? Like we've all been in that movie where it's like the never-ending third act of a Marvel movie where you just feel like you're getting punched in the face with action, and it ceases gripping you if character isn't illuminated and structurally it's not moving and changing.
Well, and this comes back to what you were saying, which is really character is everything, because if the reader is not invested in the character, you don't care what happens. in the book or to that character, right? So this is why everything starts and really ends with character.
So this person wants to know about how, as Orphan X begins to show his emotions and question his relationships with both his family and his friends, will his veneer continue to crack as your series goes on? And then for you, Nick, like, how do you think about as your characters evolve throughout how did they become like an extension of you? Like, what are you thinking about as you deepen these characters?
Well, I'm thinking about the relationships between them, right? So the character, and that adds to sort of the depth and complexity of every book. It's not just who are the characters, but how do they relate to each other. And so Peter Ash, my hero, has a sweet patootie named June Cassidy. And so there's always some dynamic that's happening with them that's a little bit different. And then Peter's best friend is Lewis. And so Lewis's life is also moving forward. And, you know, kind of how are Peter and Lewis relating to each other? So to me, that's a big piece of kind of how I think about moving things forward, is to, you know, relationships evolve, people evolve, right? So kind of what's the next, not necessarily expected progression, but interesting progression. You know, again, I like you actually, I have, there's a book where Peter goes back to his hometown. You know, I'm not ready to write that book yet. There's a book where Peter's in high school, right? Like, that'd be really interesting. So what was Peter like as a 14-year-old, and what problems would he run into? Like, I have that kind of stuff, which again comes back to deepening who he is now, right? To get into somebody's family life that isn't really present in the book. Again, you learn so much more about that character. So that's, I don't know, did I even answer that question?
So he's more evolved than Orphan X, who decidedly does not have a sweet patootie. But he's figuring it out, man. I mean, he lives among ordinary people. I think of Evan as he lives in this high-rise apartment, and he's surrounded with all these people who have ordinary concerns. And I always think of him like he's got his face up to the aquarium glass, and he's looking in at these people who can live an ordinary life that he can't ever have for himself. But he can be the wolf who hunts wolves, who are going to terrorize that for them, and he can do that for them. But he's got this very close relationship with a younger hacker whose name is Josephine Morales, who he starts with when...
My favorite character.
Is she?
Yes, absolutely.
Who's 16, and like his relationship with her becomes sort of undeniable. Like, he starts to recognize a lot of emotion. I think that's the clearest place for him. She calls him her uncle person. But first he wants nothing to do with her. But over time, I think it's a very clean lane for him to sort of start to understand the notion of having to care about other people emotionally and what that means, rather than just doing what's right for them operationally and setting it aside on the basis of code. You know, humans are messy. And I think that part of it is he's got OCD that can rev into high a lot. And you can be perfect. I wrote Batman comics for a couple of years, and I was always interested in Batman because I think Batman's very much about the tension between perfection and intimacy. And Batman doesn't have any superpowers. He can't fly, he doesn't have a cape, he doesn't have a magic ring like Green Lantern that can do anything in a way that I always found vaguely annoying. I never quite understood that. But he represents the pinnacle of what human discipline can be. That's what Batman is, basically. Like technology, training, even spiritually. He went to Tibet. Mixed martial arts, but he doesn't have anybody. His parents died when he was young. He has no siblings. There's Robin, but Robin's always getting killed. And then there's a new Robin, and new Robin gets killed. And so he's alone.
Don't be Robin.
Don't be Robin, no. And so the only way that you can really maintain perfection is if you're completely alone and you can hold your own schedule, because people, spouses, kids, dogs, pets, we're complicated, we're messy. And so you're not really perfect if you're alone, because you just think you are, because no one's holding up a mirror to show you how flawed and inadequate you are in so many ways. And I think a lot of that for Evan is coming out of this like really strict set of rules. He operates by the 10 Assassin's Commandments. But the first book in the series finds him breaking every single one of the 10 Commandments. It's like he's shattering. I think of the series as like it opens up and he realizes that he's Pinocchio. He's like an archetypal action hero, but he wants to be a real boy. And the series is about his process of trying to figure out what that means. And how that impacts him actually changes quite drastically the very nature of the books and the missions and the stories. Because the more real he is and sees other people, I can't write the same kind of stories that I could write earlier on in the books where he kills 6 people with a pen in a room.
So I have a question for you. So do you begin at sort of this theoretical level?
No.
Or do you discover it through the writing process?
No, it's totally the opposite. It's really weird. I only see it, I've only figured out stuff about the book and the commandments or his bed. He sleeps on a floating magnetic bed. I only figure out what these things mean sometimes, like books and books in. All that comes to me are scenes, snippets of dialogue, conversations, dilemmas, and then they sort of shape up. But I'm playing in the very concrete, not in the abstract or theoretical. I'm never saying, oh, I worked on a TV show one time. My showrunner drove me crazy. So he'd be like, the theme for the next episode is betrayal. I'm like, I don't write that way. I write from something happens and it's captivating. Something happens and it's awful, right? Here's a line of dialogue. Here's an action scene that you think is going to go left, but it goes right. So it's all these pieces first, and then as I start to shape them, it sort of emerges what they are, but it's always from the specific up.
So it's like a stall. It all sort of rises up together.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's part of what's really weird about being a writer is you never know where it comes from. And I think that's some of the stress of writing is like you could just wake up one day. I mean, dialogue can't really be taught. There's all these classes in writing, and a lot of them focus on structure, like Robert McKay and story, and people talk about the hero's journey, but dialogue's different every single time out. And so there's a weird thing being a writer because you're like, well, what if I just wake up one day and I no longer think of new dialogue? It no longer just comes to me when I'm writing. It's a very weird relationship with the creative.
It all feels sort of like magic.
Yeah.
And there is, for me, this sort of fear that like, yeah, I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and it's gonna be gone. Because it feels very fragile, and it's not, because I keep showing up in the book. I mean, it keeps happening, but maybe that says more about me than anything else. But it's definitely a weird thing to do for a living.
So then when you're sitting down to write, what is kind of your writing routine, your process? How long does it take you to get that first draft down on the page when you're writing a book? Kind of what does it look like to write a book?
Well, I do a lot of different things now. I rarely have uninterrupted even days, let alone weeks of writing, because I do a lot of different things. So the books are always the spine of my career, but I travel a lot now, like coming here to talk to you guys. I mean, I'm writing on the plane. I can try and write in the hotel room. But basically, if I do have an uninterrupted day, it's no phone, it's no email. I sit down, I put white noise on, and I just write all day. There's really like nothing to it. I just write as much as I can with focus to keep the world out as long as possible.
Yeah, I have an internet blocker on my computer, so it lets my Word document talk to, Microsoft Central, so everything gets updated. But it won't let me, go on social media or read the paper or do any of that other stuff.
How about research?
I will often, I'm writing, when I'm beginning something, so I'm beginning a book now, and I'll often stop to be like, okay, I need to know a little bit more about this thing. But at a certain point, I just sort of, I bracket and all caps, learn something about this. And then when I have a day where it's not working very well, I'll be like, all right, I'm going to go back through. And I don't know about you, but I really write one draft. It's sort of one continuous editing draft. So I'll write my 1,000, 1,500 words. And then the next day I will go back and revise that 1,500 words, and I'll write another 1,500 words. And then I'll go back and I'll revise the previous 3,000 words. I don't, every once in a while I'll go all the way back to the beginning because I'll get lost and there are some threads that I was, pulling that I can't remember what they were. But by the time I've written that last, sentence, I have a couple of notes to myself in the manuscript to clean up, and I have a document that's like, fix these things. But it takes me about 2 weeks to then get it ready to go to send it off to my editor. So I'm not a, first draft, second draft, third draft person.
Yeah, I'd say my rough drafts now are close to what, my third or fourth draft was earlier in my career. My first two, I wrote terrible rough drafts, and then I had to take the whole book apart like an engine block. I mean, I didn't write a rough draft that resembled a finished book until my third novel. Like, I think the first draft of my third novel was like, okay, that's a rough draft of a novel that now needs work. But the first two weren't even that. There's no way to learn how to write a book unless you're doing it and screwing it up. I mean, I had a meeting one time with a somewhat smug screenwriter in LA, and he took me to lunch and was asking me all these questions. He said, I don't like to do anything unless I know exactly how to do it before I start so that I don't make any mistakes. And I was like, dude, don't write a novel and don't get married. Also, consider not having children. A lot of what we learn is by trying to do something and messing it up and not being too hard on ourselves. So, give yourself, if you're writers in the audience, give yourself permission to have the vomit draft, right? You can't fix a blank page, but just get something down that you can make better.
And get to the end of something.
Yeah.
Don't write half of 3 books, right? Get to finish one of them.
Or one draft of 10 books, right? Write, one story through 10 versions till it's as tight as you can make it.
So then when you're writing and you're thinking about research, is it before or after you've started writing, after you've had those brackets left in the draft where you're like, join a mind control group, cult?
Well, I don't do this bracket business, so you better ask Petrie. That would drive me crazy to have those brackets would be like lurking over my shoulder. I do research up front, and then I do more and more research as I go. And I just collapse my entire internet bar to just Google and ChatGPT, which is a very good research assistant. And that's all that's like on my whole computer and desktop when I write, but I don't wait. So I do research up front, and then I'll do more and more as I go.
But you actually know what you're doing, so which is that allows you to do the research up front, whereas I'm making it up, so I have to, research as I figure out the next chapter or thing or whatever.
All right, well, you do you, Petrie.
So you both have very strong women characters in your books, Joey and June Cassidy especially. Are there women in your life who have shaped your female characters?
Every woman in my life is a strong woman. My mom, her nickname at work was the Hammer. So that'll give you some idea. My sister is a killer salesperson. My wife, Margaret, her nickname is Hurricane Margaret. She's a force of nature. I just find those characters, those people in the world, right? I like people who are in hot pursuit of their life. So those are the women that I know and spend time with. So it's not I don't say, I think this woman character needs to be a strong woman. These are just the women in my life.
I like to surround myself with very weak women. So we're a little bit different. And
they make you look good.
No, I have, I mean, it's very similar. I have, my Hollywood agent is like, I'm just surrounded with kind of incredibly competent, strong women, from my mom and my sister to my wife, just all the way around. And one of the things I think about a lot is, I don't necessarily write strong women. I write complicated women. We don't have a ton of conversations where we're like, I want a really strong male protagonist, right? I like writing them with a lot of complex, like I don't write a woman character, I write a woman. I think that helps too, writing cross gender, cross race, I'm not writing a black character in some theoretical abstract way. It's a character who's black, right? It's a character who's white, who's Jewish, who's whatever. I want to write from the inside out of someone who's idiosyncratic. And, I think part of it is, I also just really like women. I think
Heard that about you.
But I don't mean it in a lascivious way. I mean, you know, in business, in life, and you can tell sometimes where I don't like writing a sort of just fantastical version of a character. And so for me, whenever I introduce a new character, I have a ton of women around Orphan X. Like, it's one of the things I started to realize when I was like, well, there's Melinda Trong, there's Naomi Templeton, there's Mia who's downstairs, there's Joey, there's like the new president of the United States. Is like it's suffused with it, the books. It's like there's way more women characters around him, and that wasn't necessarily by design. But I also like the kind of nuance and the way that plays around him. So I don't know.
He's trying to learn about his emotional life, right? And so in general, women tend to be a little bit better at that than men. And so he has this group of teachers, right, to help him work this stuff out.
Mm.
Okay, so this person won. It's hard to transition between these questions. So this person wants to know, what do you both read? Do you read within your own genre? Do you read other genres? Do you have any book recommendations?
I'm so all over the place. Like, I love getting books from independent bookstores and you know, all other places. I do order from Amazon now and then just to mess with their algorithms. So I'll randomly get stuff that's like, you might like, you know, early Freudian case studies and Russian prison tattoos. And Nick Petrie. I mean, that's like completely confused. I think my aim is to like break the algorithm on Amazon. Look, I read very widely in the genre. I blurb a lot. I love Nick's books, and I'm not just saying that because we're here. He's terrific. I love Megan Abbott. She's one of my favorites. I mean, look, I'm like right now, what am I reading right now? I'm reading a book called John Banville, a book called Snow.
It's great.
Oh my God, is he great. I'm reading that. I'm reading René Guénon, who's a French philosopher, a book called Crisis in the Modern World. He published it in 1927, kind of weird political bearing. I mean, my nightstand is my house is really, everything's organized except my nightstand. I literally have stacks of books. I have like 3 stacks of 9 to 12 books just stacked up. And so I'm constantly reading, and I read very widely, but I love fiction. Nonfiction to me always feels a little bit like work.
Yeah, I'm reading more nonfiction. I go through phases where I can't read fiction, so I read a lot of genre stuff, but I read, you know, my wife will say, you know, she reads a lot of women's fiction. She's like, read this one. And again, writing women, it's really useful to read how women write about women, right? So I read all kinds of stuff. I read poetry. I read, you know, I like nonfiction because I can learn stuff from it. I'm not just taking apart a story. One of the things that happens when you've been a writer for a while is it's reading recreationally really changes. It's hard to find something to fall into, like when you were a kid, which again, it's part of what I like about Gregg's work is for me, it's really easy to just fall into and just soak into. There's a guy named David McCluskey, who we both know, who wrote a book called Damascus Station, which I think is the best spy novel I've read. He was a former CIA analyst that I've read in a long time. If you like John le Carré, again, deeply complex characters, villains who you really understand who they are as people, and you're kind of rooting for them and you kind of hate them.
He's terrific.
Yeah, he's only written 2 books, and he's a super guy. And that first book is spectacular, especially.
Yeah, I think it gets harder to read books that are middling because you can see all the wires, right? You can see all the things behind it. You do get good ideas from them though sometimes, because they'll go in some direct. You're like, oh, you should do this, this, and this, and then they do the more predictable thing. But then you get other ideas. But it's the thing that people don't always realize is when we're reading for blurbs, or when we're reading for awards, or when we're reading for recommendations, we're dying to find something that's great. Like, we love that piece, and that's the part that's really rooting for that, and doing events. And there's a lot of people writing amazing stuff. I mean, I remember last year, but she couldn't come, so she's coming this year. Oyin Brathwaite is her name. She wrote a book called My Sister, the Serial Killer. She's a Nigerian writer. It's so good. And Lisa Unger, who's my co-president at International Thriller Writers, we were talking about who to do. And she's like, oh, it's this great book. It's a spotlight. We should have her over to be a spotlight guest, which she's going to do this year at Thriller Fest, which I'm delighted. And our thriller master is Dennis Lehane, which I'm very excited about because I love Dennis's work. But it's this little slip of a book, and I wouldn't have found it ordinarily, but it's so on point. And when you're reading something that's got that kind of tone and character and voice and personality, then you're not thinking. Then I'm like a kid again, right? Then you're just marveling in it. Or also what's weird is, how many of you have read Kurt Vonnegut? Like, Kurt Vonnegut makes no sense. There's no reason we should ever read Kurt Vonnegut. Like, his books have no plot, but he has his own Kurt Vonnegut magic that's like charming and weird and quirky. And so it's always fascinating to read people where you don't know the mechanism by which it's working.
And it's the finding somebody who really is unique is really something. Did you read 5 Decembers? Won the Edgar Award by, it's a pseudonym, James Kestrel. Historical, set on the eve of World War II in Hawaii. There's a detective, he finds a murderer and he has to get on a plane to Hong Kong, or Taiwan maybe, I can't remember, it's a couple years ago. And while he's in the air, the war breaks out. And the whole book takes 5 years, and it's just gorgeous, sumptuous. It's history, it's place, it's this very particular character. There's a love story. I don't know, that was one of my best finds in the last few years as well.
I mentioned Megan Abbott. Part of what I love so much about her books is it's like that. Like, you tumble in and you're wrapped, and then also nothing's happening. I'm like, it's like page 70 and I'm like this, and like nothing has happened yet. It's just this slow mounting psychological tension. She really is something.
So then, to kind of start to wrap things up, what is on the horizon? Are there any adaptations coming of Orphan X or Peter Ash? New books, maybe a next in the series, standalone, comic books? What's coming up next?
The next Orphan X is the 10th in the series, and it will change everything forever. Like, none of the books are going to be the same after that. So there's sort of like there's going to be a culmination of the 10. It can also be a standalone. And I'm just finishing we can't announce it, but the film rights steered it into a really great place, and we're waiting to announce that right now. And then I have a couple movies that are kind of in turnaround. Everything got really screwy with the strike and with all kinds of other stuff, but I have one script that I'd sold that's it's like if Silence of the Lambs was full horror instead of a psychological thriller. It's called Sabine. I co-wrote it with a friend of mine, Philip Eisner. He wrote a movie called Event Horizon years back, and our last movie came out a few years ago. We wrote a movie called Sweet Girl for Netflix. It stars Jason Momoa. And so we had this script called Sabine that we sold, and then it got put in turnaround, but it looks like we might be teasing that one out and breathing it back to life.
Yeah, the TV stuff, there's nothing done, but we passed another milestone, so it's a little bit closer to maybe. It's been a maybe for quite a while. You know better than I, but it's a weird experience.
You never say something's happening. The rule is till you're standing on the set on the second day of production, then you can say that it might happen.
But I've actually just finished Standalone, so my first standalone novel, which takes place in Wisconsin's Driftless region. And it's about a guy named Bobby Cruikshank who is released from prison with a goal of sort of getting his life together and going straight. But it's hard when you come from a family of criminals. And his little brother Paul, who is the one who got out, went to college, went to law school, has a nice family, is found murdered in a roadhouse parking lot. and nobody knew what he was doing there or why, and the county sheriff has no clue. It was a very clean kill. And Bobby is a little bit at loose ends and needs something to focus on, and needs to really figure out what happened to his little brother. And so that's this next book that still has no title.
I'm excited for that one, man.
I'm looking forward to it.
You don't have a title? You don't even have a working title?
No, so I have learned to not give a book a working title, because then I get very attached to that title. And I am not good at titling books. The working title for this book, The Price You Pay, was something that I will never admit to.
Come
but
on.
I
Just
loved it.
Just tell us. We won't tell
Tell
anyone.
us.
I loved it.
What was
and
it?
I said it.
Was it Sweet Patootie?
It was Sweet Patootie. I told my editor, and she's like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." So the working title for the standalone is Up My Damn Game, because that's what I'm trying to do, is to up my damn game.
Well, thank you both for being here with us tonight. This has been a fantastic conversation. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here with us in person, and if anyone's watching online. And that our next Authors Visiting in Des Moines event will be on Thursday, May 30th, with the one and only Joyce Carol Oates right here at Central Library. And then after we wrap up right here, Nick and Gregg will be signing copies of their books right out in the breezeway. So
Thank you. This is a wonderful librarian system. Really, thank you for having us here.
Yeah, and thank all of you for coming out on a damp night to talk to a couple of goofy writers. We appreciate it.